Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. Thanks for joining today's session on AI ethics, global perspectives. We will give everyone an opportunity to join for another 30 seconds, and then we will get started. Great. I think we have reached critical mass to get going, and we have a lot to cover. We have three amazing speakers today and panelists, and so I don't want to delay us from starting so that we have maximum time for them to share their wisdom today. Welcome, everyone. I'm Stefan Verhulst. I'm the co-founder of GovLab, and I'm delighted to introduce today's session, which is the seventh session around AI ethics, global perspectives. And the AI ethics global perspectives is a course that is co-organized with the Institute for Ethics of Artificial Intelligence at the Technical University of Munich, the Responsible AI Center at NYU, and GovLab. And today I'm here with the co-course leader, Julia Stojanovic, who is a professor at NYU, in addition to 50 other titles, which I won't even mention. But I'm delighted to be here with Julia, who will introduce the panelists. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Stefan. It's a pleasure to be here. And it's a pleasure to introduce the three excellent panelists that we have today. To start, I would like to introduce Avinash Dadhich. He is Dean and Professor of Law at the Institute of Legal Studies and Research at GLA University in Mathura in India. His areas of specialization are in global competition law and anti-corruption and fraud law. He is currently focusing on laws and regulation of AI and robotic technologies. Prior to joining GLA University, Dadhich was a professor of law across a number of universities around India. He has also spent time in the private sector, working at organizations like Deloitte and Ernst & Young. He served as an advocate for the Supreme Court of India. Welcome, Avinash. The second speaker is Christina Pombo. She is an economist focused on social policy, working in the intersection of technology and government, ethics, and AI. Cristina advises the manager and division chiefs of the Inter-American Development Bank's social sector on operational issues and digital transformation strategies in education, health, social protection, labor markets, gender, diversity, and migration. In this capacity, Cristina spearheads initiatives that leverage digital technologies to improve social services, such as FAIR LAC, the first public-private alliance for a responsible use of AI in the region. She is part of the OECD network of experts on AI. Cristina is also qualified in digital transformation in governments from the Harvard Kennedy School and in data ethics from the University of Michigan. Welcome, Cristina. A pleasure to have you here. And finally, Natalia Domagala, who leads on data ethics policy at the Central Digital and Data Office, Cabinet Office in the UK. She previously advised on open government and open data policies for the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport in the United Kingdom and implemented open data challenges for 360 Giving. Natalia has research experience in anthropology, gender, civic tech, and economic development, and has recently co-edited a book situating open data, global trends in local contexts. Natalia is a policy fellow at the Center for Science and Policy, University of Cambridge. She received her master's in local economic development from the London School of Economics and Political Science, and her BA in Anthropology and Media from Goldsmiths, University of London. Welcome, Natalia.
Great. Thanks so much, Julia, for the introduction. And as I mentioned, what we hope to do with the AI ethics course is to really invite people and experts and scholars and opinion leaders like the ones that we have today, in order to give us a flavor on how AI ethics is being developed and how AI ethics is also being perceived and explored across the world. The reason why we started the AI Ethics Global Perspectives course was because of the need to really have a more global conversation around the different aspects of AI ethics across different applications, different solutions, and also different perceptions on what the potential of AI and the potential harm of AI may be. And so today we will leverage the expertise here in the room, which also, as all of you probably know, can also be rewatched on our website, because the three that we'll present today have also shared, of course, the modules on the website that can be freely downloaded. In addition to, of course, Avinash, Cristina, and Natalia's module, it's also important to notify that we have 29 now in total courses and lectures. And so we hope that over time we will really build a library of different perspectives that can enrich the AI ethics conversation by actually bringing different global voices to the table, which quite often, of course, is not present. With that, let us start it. Julia, I give you the floor to get going with Avinash.
Great, thank you, Stefan. So Avinash, in your very interesting module, you discuss different regulations on technology throughout history from around the world. How do you see the regulatory ecosystem around AI emerging in India and in other parts of the global south?
Okay, so first of all, namaste. I'm from India, and I hope that now everything is feeling well. So let's discuss about you asked me about the India and global south. Okay, so the issue is that when we talk about India or the global south, because India is the part of so-called global south, but I'm not very comfortable with the term global south anymore, because the term, I think, it was invented in 1950s or 60s, when there was a clear line between north and south. And especially when you see the technology in the modern time in 2022, then I don't see that this north and south terms are really working. Okay, so yeah, but obviously we can see differences in north and south. And even I mentioned in my module that the objective of AI is very much different in different jurisdictions, different cultures. So in developing countries, what we can see that most of the governments or state or the citizens, they are perceiving AI as a great opportunity for the public good. Okay, and if you see the history, then most of the time you will find that new innovations are always considered initially good for people. Like, for example, environmental. So when the new industries came into existence in 17th or 18th centuries, nobody was talking about environmental issues or pollution. Okay, in late maybe 1950s, 60s, in developed countries, somebody started talking about environmental issues, pollution issues. Okay, but still in developing countries, people are not very much comfortable with environmental issues with the development. Okay, so I think this approach we can follow in AI also. So it's not about north or south, it's about the developed or developing world. Yeah, so you can have different countries everywhere. Even in some north part of world, you will find some countries where they don't have a very high level of technologies. Okay, so what is my understanding and what I observe in the developed or non-developing world, that in developing world people are appreciating technologies. Governments are very crazy about new innovations. They want to implement those technologies for public good. Like for example, if I give you the example of in India, the facial recognition technology, which is very controversial now, almost 17 different facial recognition systems are being deployed by government of India and different states. Already 17 are being deployed and another 17 or 20 they are under process. And people are not having any issue with that because it's bringing a lot of innovation, a lot of efficiency in market and in public governance. So I give you one example, another, that how these systems are being misjudged or misused by the government. So for example, facial recognition technology was used by Delhi police. Okay. So they got in a direction by the Delhi High Court, and the Delhi High Court said that if you want to find the missing children, so please use this technology so that you can find missing children, because this is a huge problem. Okay, so by that direction, Delhi police started using this technology, and they don't have any legal or regulatory or forget about ethical dimension, and now they are using this technology for everything. And their main reasoning is that this is good for public. This is supported by the by a court order. So in developing countries, these technologies right now bringing good outcome, but at the same time, there is an absence of ethical, legal, and regulatory framework. Okay, and why people are not serious about it? Because this is a historical reason that first people like to see some outcomes, some positive things from technologies, and once they realize that now they are losing some their legal, political, or constitutional rights, then in the political arena people start talking about that thing. Like for example, data privacy law. So in India, data privacy bill is pending since 2018. Okay, so in 2022 still we don't have data privacy law, and there is a lot of lobbying happening at the central level that what should be the data privacy law. And the AI, still in most of the global south, if I use the same term again, though I'm not agree with that, but in global south people are not comfortable with regulating AI. I think they are following that regulatory theory that at the initial phase, we should not try to intervene in the technological regulation. Two reasons. First, we don't control it. Second, we should not control it, because right now we are getting some positive outcomes. And at the public policy level, the governments are very comfortable with these technologies right now. So it's a mixed situation. People are getting good services, but I believe that very soon we should talk and we will talk about the ethical, legal, and regulatory framework.
That's a very interesting perspective. I mean, already you being able to say how many of these systems are being used by the Indian government, I think is the level of detail that in many jurisdictions we lack. So for example, I couldn't give you a comparable number for the city of New York, even.
Because it's in public domain, because in December 2021, one MP raised this question in the parliament. And the government said very clearly, Ministry of Information and Technology minister said that we don't have any regulatory system, but he had to declare that how many systems are being deployed in India right now. And so I don't know about the secretive systems, but for the public good, for the public policy, right now these are the systems are being deployed in India.
I see.
So Aadhaar, if you see the Aadhaar, one of the most controversial and most innovative things, where they are collecting data of almost 1.3 billion people. So they are using this technology. Okay.
Right. So it seems that currently an infrastructure for regulating AI lacks very badly. Where do you see this going in the future, both in India and perhaps on the global stage? Do you think that it's within reach to have a global standard on AI regulation?
I think your second question is about the global regulation, because if I mix it with the India or the global or developing and developed, first we need to understand, as I said earlier, that countries are observing AI from the different perspective. Okay, for maybe a developed country, AI has different objective. They are already having a very high level of social security, financial, freedom. So maybe, they are more critical about new challenges or new innovations in technology. In developing countries, they are still less concerned about non-economic objectives of any technology or any innovation. Okay, so if I talk only about the global thing, then the first thing we need to understand that we have to prioritize our objectives. Okay, because so far we have completely failed to regulate any technology at the global level. So if I talk about very simple example, lethal autonomous weapons, this is very common, and 66 countries even gave their consent at the United Nations level that we want to ban it. But then few powerful countries like the Israel, US, Russia, I don't want to name more countries, but these are the powerful countries. They said, no, this is not a good idea. We should not regulate it. So it's a very simple, you can see that at the global level, sometimes even the developed countries, and not all developed countries, because you can see clear distinction between in the north, the global north, that there is a European north, and then the American north, and then Russian north, and then there is a Israel north. So even within the north global, you will find different camps talking about the regulation of AI. Okay, so I don't see a clear cut north or south camping anymore. Maybe 1950s or 60s, when we're talking about the states. And now, you need to understand, when we talk about regulation, earlier at the international organization level, we were talking about regulations of state, the governments, the state. Now we are not talking about states anymore. We are talking about regulation of technology owned by non-state players. Okay, like the all big IT companies, big giants. So even they are not controlled by their own states, and they are everywhere. So this is a very unique situation in even in the international law, because in international law we were talking about the responsibilities of non-state players under the international humanitarian law, like the guerrillas or some terrorist groups, that what should be their responsibilities under international public law. So far we could not define it properly, but they were very weak groups. If you compare with a like a terrorist group and a state, then you can clearly see that they are not so powerful. But here the situation is that these people, IT big giants, they are more powerful than most of the states. Like for example, if I give you, India is this fifth largest economy right now. So Indian economy is $3 trillion, but the value of Apple is also $3 trillion. So if you include like developing countries, least developing countries, maybe Apple got more economic power, more than 100 countries. So this is very new thing in the international public law.
Great.
So first thing I want to say, that this is not possible by the states to regulate everything. So we need to start with in phases wise. We need to. I think there are two approaches. One, we cannot regulate AI. First, we need to understand at the global level, because people have different interests. But what we can do, that we can create soft laws. Okay, so soft laws, recently United Nations, they issued some guidelines that what should be the rules and regulations, and then gradually state members can adopt those soft laws in their national laws. So this is a very classical approach of the United Nations in various areas. Second, instead of regulating AI as an AI, we should try to regulate AI in different domains like the competition, intellectual property, international criminal law, these type of areas where already a strong regime is there. First, regulating technology, philosophy or doctrine is very much missing at the United Nations. We haven't done it. This is very new for United Nations. But if I talk about how to regulate technology under competition law, you will find a huge jurisprudence. Like in last 30, 40 years, competition authorities are regulating technologies. IP authorities are regulating technologies. So if we root through WIPO, United Nations, WTO, or some other international organizations, we can have some policy. And Europe can be a good example. The European AI Act is a very good example how to regulate AI as a technology at a regional level, and that can be a good role model. Our FTC guidelines issued in 2021 talking about fairness and ethics in AI, that can be a good role model for more developed countries which is not very comfortable with very strict regulation. So we have two examples right now: the European model, which is very strict, very clear, and the FTC model, which is more in the guidelines point of view. So I think
Avinash, thank you very much for these insights. I'm sorry, but we are starting to run short
no,
on
no, I
time.
understand. Sorry.
I'm sure that we will have lots of opportunities to discuss this. For the folks in the audience, please put your questions for Avinash and other panelists in the Q&A. Over to you, Stepan.
Thanks, Julia, for, yeah, if you have questions, put in the Q&A. Of course, I already failed to say that at the beginning, but we also want to hear and have a conversation amongst all the participants here today. And thanks, Avinash, for those great comments. It really sets the stage for today's conversation, because I do want to pick up where you left, which is the concept of emerging models. And going to Cristina, typically when we talk about models, we talk about, you have the European model, you have the US model, and quite often it's then positioned as being alternatives to the Chinese model. But what you, anyway, in your presentation, rightly so, have alerted to is that there are other models, right, such as the ones in the Latin American region emerging as well, and that we need to take notice. And so over to you, Cristina, to really learn from what you see in the Latin American region that is unique, exciting, but also challenging from your point of view.
Thank you very much, Stefan and Julia and Sampitri, for this invitation here and for inviting me to participate in all the models. And I really like Avinash's provocation about the global South and non-developing and developing world, because it's hard to come to terms in how we should approach or how we should refer to different models, as you said, Stefan. So I can tell you 3 challenges that came to mind when thinking in the pilot projects that the Inter-American Development Bank has been working with the Latin American countries. And for Latin American, we are talking about 26 countries in the Latin American region, plus the Caribbean. And Brazil, that for some people is, since it's with another language, for some people it's not clear, is in the same region. But it's so from Mexico to Argentina and with the Caribbean islands. So it's a very diverse region. And I can think in 3 main challenges, Stefan. The first one is lack of capacities. The second one is data or data governance. And the third one is misunderstanding of what is responsible AI or how those ethical principles should be applied. And I really like what Avinash was saying about soft law or hard law. Latin American countries are starting to work around the soft law and trying to get the OECD principles or the UNESCO recommendations, but it's hard to operationalize that in the real world. So in lack of capacities, Stefan, the region faces limitations of qualified labor force. The Manpower Group affirms that after COVID-19 pandemic, more companies reported having difficulties in obtaining the talent they need. So this proportion has increased from 45% to 69% globally. And in Argentina, for example, while in 2019, 50% of employees declare having difficulty in filling a job, in 2021, 72% did so. And this is very important for the AI ecosystem because it's not only programming AI or developing decision support systems, but it's also, if you are thinking about different ways of predictive models for dropouts, for example, what is the policy implication of the model of the outcome of that model? And that policy implication may lead you to think in different talent for your teachers or for your doctors if you are talking health, right? So it's a capacities has like a different fault. Um, data governance and data governance is a very challenging thing. The feasibility of AI project mainly relies on the available data, right? So which data will feed the algorithm, train it, and be needed for the decision-making process. In the region, many discussions have been held since we start talking about digitalization, about the need to have high quality, complete, and reliable data. However, little has been said about the importance of defining transparent and agile processes for handling this data. Good data, garbage in, garbage out, we all know that. The idea behind using emerging technologies and big data is that more decisions will be better informed and based on data. And everyone here knows that the quality of the data determines the quality of the result. And as digital technologies such as AI power an ever-expanding portion of the enterprise world, data governance is becoming increasingly critical. But the definition of data government has not kept up with all the changes shaping the tech landscape. I think I'm going to stop here because I know we have a lot of other discussions to do, but those were the three challenges that came to mind.
That's great, Christina. And yeah, I mean, these are big topics, and we could, on each of them, we could spend several more hours unpacking them. But I do want to also go back to your initial introduction that it's a very diverse region. And it's also, of course, not only diverse across regions or across countries, but also diverse within countries and within sectors, right? And so trying to also understand, so how do you, and Latin America quite often is actually a great model to be more participatory, right, in how approaches and solutions get developed. And so wondering whether there's anything in the region that we can learn from on how to be more inclusive in developing, for instance, soft law or different approaches as you have laid out as well.
So when we started the initiative that Julia mentioned in my bio, that is FAIR LAC, it's a word game, right? FAIR, AI in the middle, and LAC, Latin American and the Caribbean. When we started FAIR LAC, that was part of our motivation, Estefan. The vast majority of the existing AI ethics documents were written in North America or Europe. Therefore, the discourse has been shaped by them as well. And moreover, even with the global north, or sorry, Avinash, but even with this, the different global norths, the perspectives that are represented in the existing AI ethics documents are very limited. There are not statistics of the participation of other relevant identity categories, such as race, religion, sexual orientation, but they are probably relatively homogeneous along these axes as well, right? It seems that the global north, or whatever you want to call it, is shaping this debate, which raises concern about neglecting local knowledge, cultural pluralism, global fairness. So it is critical that other regions participate in these discussions. And with participation, what I mean is diverse teams. And I think it seems a little bit repetitive and cliche, but working with a diverse multidisciplinary team when designing and deploying AI is critical for changing the discourse. So I really like, Stefan, when you inviting us to be part of this global perspective on AI, because it's hard for Latin American to start saying, hey, look at us, even though we are a big part of the world. But so usually we think about gender, race, religion, but also the process should consider stakeholders as diverse as the people who will use the technology and how will be affected by it. Not just the practitioners who develop it, but the experts who guide the process. And then, as well as diverse teams, I would say diverse approaches. Be creative in how to connect the uses of AI in more diverse areas. For example, EY created a cognitive human enterprise initiative where the objective is to solve global scale human challenges and by investing in massively interdisciplinary collaboration. One aspect of accelerating towards the cognitive diversity is to leverage the benefits of combining art and technology under the belief that the future of human-centered innovation lies in the intersection of arts and technology, for example. And then language, finally, but very important, using a common language for talking about challenges, opportunities, and potential risks, like a common framework. We we have different languages, of course, and we need to think about different cosmovisions of the world as well. But having a common framework, I think, could sound a little bit counterintuitive, but common framework for including diverse perspectives and diverse common cosmovisions.
Mhm. Great, fascinating, and I'm sure we will pick up on that. But I think it also sets the perfect stage for Natalia, and so Julia, over to you.
Thank you, Stefan. Natalia, in your very interesting module, you discuss the challenges of bringing algorithmic transparency into the public sector. Could you tell us a little bit about how algorithmic transparency measures might complement other existing AI ethics initiatives in the public sector? How do they help ensure human oversight in the use of these systems for decision making?
Sure, thank you very much. And just before I do, just wanted to echo what my fellow panelists have just said about the fact that we need to have a dialogue and we all need to collaborate on how we taking AI ethics more generally forwards on a global scale. So absolutely agree with your thoughtful remarks. So in terms of algorithmic transparency, to be very honest, algorithmic transparency is just the tip of the iceberg. And it's extremely useful. It's about communicating clearly how various government decisions are reached and what role algorithmic tools play in this process. However, this is just a very, very small fraction of the entire AI ethics ecosystem in the public sector. And of course, algorithmic transparency has many benefits. For example, to start with a very obvious one, the public has a democratic right to information and explanation about how government makes decisions, how it operates. In the UK, we have data rights that are guaranteed under the UK GDPR as well. And there is a whole range of other reasons why algorithmic transparency is really good and really useful, such as increasing trust, highlighting good practice around how new technologies are being used, facilitating learning between and across government departments, and also just being able to opening up your tools to challenge from the members of the public and various external experts. And in the UK, we've recently launched our algorithmic transparency standards to essentially help public sector bodies publish this information in a standardized way to help inform the public on how various tools are being used in the decision-making process. But as I said earlier, this is just the tip of the iceberg. And this is the final stage of the process of deploying algorithmic tools in the public sector. And that's really the moment when we're telling the members of the public that these tools are being used and we're saying how they are being used. So continuing with this iceberg metaphor, which I think is actually quite good to make this point, what's underwater is a whole range of tools and processes that public sector bodies need to have to ensure that any technological solution is deployed and used responsibly. And this can be a whole range of things. This can include ethical assessments. This can include algorithmic impact assessments. This can include any data and AI ethics frameworks and policies, any data governance frameworks, arrangements. It also includes things like organizational structure or having the right skills, having multidisciplinary teams that work on data and AI ethics, and having a culture in which AI ethics can actually thrive. And in the UK, we have a few of those things. We have the data ethics framework, we have the guide to using AI in the public sector. In terms of algorithmic impact assessments, for example, I think there was a really good case study in Canada with their algorithmic impact assessment, because they managed to connect their algorithmic transparency measure with the actual impact assessment. So public sector organizations fill out the impact assessment, and then it can be published on their open data website, which I think is a really good streamlined way of doing that. So in general, I would say algorithmic transparency is just the final stage. And in order to get algorithmic transparency right, we need to have all those processes that are happening in the background. We need to get them right as well. And to quickly touch on your second question, Julia, on on how algorithmic transparency helps with human oversight. So I think it really does help with accountability, and we've seen that with the open data movement. And you know, I can mainly speak to the UK's example because that's what I was working on. But we are asking our public sector agencies to give a detailed explanation on how that particular algorithmic tool is integrated into the wider decision-making process, what influence the tool has, and also where is the human in the loop. So how much information the tool provides to the decision maker, what is that information, what kind of decisions humans take in this overall process. Can they review the tool? Can they override decisions? Do they need any particular training? And also what's the process for appeal and any reviews. And I think once we make this kind of information openly available, then at any point, the members of the public or civil society organizations or researchers or just anyone really, they will be able to challenge what they see. And if they think that perhaps a human oversight option in this particular project or tool is not sufficient, they will be able to tell us, they will be able to challenge this, and they will be able to ask us to change that. And I think another issue that's really crucial and that algorithmic transparency can perhaps help advance is having feedback mechanisms, having a continuous dialogue between government agencies, public sector suppliers as well, and anyone, policymakers using those tools to assist decisions. So having the kind of dialogue between those groups and the members of the public. And I think algorithmic transparency is the first step that can facilitate that dialogue.
Great, thank you very much, Natalia. Maybe following up very quickly on your comments, your experience is primarily in the United Kingdom, of course, and you referred to an example that is a very prominent one in Canada. And, you know, although we don't like the distinction between the global north and the rest of the world, still that distinction is present here. So how do you see the future of these algorithmic transparency measures being adopted throughout the world? Do you think that's within reach?
I hope so. And I might just be very optimistic here, but I think definitely, because if we are looking at things like global AI readiness, for example, the countries that are that score very highly in those indexes and rankings are not necessarily the countries that are the sort of common, the usual suspects. So I think that the readiness and the capabilities are definitely there in countries outside of the usual circle of North America and Europe. But I do think that the fact that the current examples of algorithmic transparency initiatives are from Canada, from New York City, from the UK, from the Netherlands, France, from Finland, I think that concentration of algorithmic transparency initiatives in North America and Europe is a huge problem. And I was really pleased to see actually that there are some initiatives in the field coming from other countries as well. So Chile, they've recently launched this. They launched a public sector algorithm repository, and as far as I understand, this is run by the university, the Adolfo Ibanez University, and I think this is a really the interactive platform that they've built is actually incredible, and the way that this information is presented is in many ways much more accessible and much more understandable to the members of the public who are not necessarily experts in AI than many of the examples that I have seen in Europe, for example. So I think what we need to do is to maybe try to champion examples that are coming outside of our northern bubble, and personally, you know, I'm very keen to learn more about why those algorithmic transparency initiatives are not happening in countries that actually do have those capabilities and do have really good scores in terms of open data and AI readiness. And if there is anything that's from where I am, I can do to maybe, you know, share some of the challenges that I had to overcome in this process, that my colleagues had to overcome. If there's anything that we can do to help, I'm always happy to. But I think in general, there is a huge opportunity here for any countries really, because this is such a new area. And we know so much based on our global experience of building open data portals and using open data. There are so many lessons from here that we can use in algorithmic transparency that we should all be jumping on this opportunity and experimenting with different kinds of algorithmic transparency methods, no matter where we are in the world.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for this, Natalia. And at this point, I would like to remind the folks in the audience to please enter your questions through the Q&A box. And we are ready to go to a Q&A. We have a question that asks the following. Does technology contribute to promoting the values of freedom at the individual level, while creating a controlled environment at the social level? This dual nature of AI makes us wonder about its ability to regulation. Perhaps it's too big to be regulated. So would anybody want to respond to this question?
Julia, can I give answer to the first question regarding whether we can regulate it or not?
Sure, please.
As I said, that we really can't regulate it. Okay, it's not good to say at the international level, but the point is that more and more things are going out of the preview of the states and the international organizations. Like, for example, currency. We always believed that currency is a state issue and we can regulate it at the national level and international level. Now the cryptocurrency, countries are struggling at both levels. We are struggling at national and international level. So first we need to understand that the world is changing. So the concept of regulation at the international level we have to approach, and it's very difficult to regulate technology. Two reasons. First, it's controlled by state and not by the states but by the corporates. And interestingly, even not by corporates, not by the big corporates. Mostly technologies are being developed by small startups. Okay, and they are everywhere. So these big companies are either buying those companies or they are developing their own technologies. So it's a very fragmented market. So we can regulate something when we are certain that what we are going to regulate. And second, it's changing so fast that no regulatory body can regulate it. Forget about international organizations. They are very famous for their slow action, but even very dynamic regulators like the antitrust regulators or intellectual property regulators, even they cannot regulate it. So it's difficult to regulate. So maybe we have to have discussion that what type of intervention, not the regulation, what type of intervention we can do at the national and international level from ethical, legal, and human rights point of view. Okay, so I think it's a very short, it's not very complete answer, but I just gave my insight that we should change the language now, not the regulation, laws, or the legalistic approach, but more like the intervention and guidance, more the soft laws, because when there is a softness, then we can contribute a lot. Regulations, laws are very strict, and with the so much changing, dynamic, fragmented technological market, that old approach will not work.
Thank you very much, Avinash. Let me go to Cristina and Natalia next, and to ask them a combination of two of the questions that were asked in Q&A. And they concern related topics. The first asks about diversity, about the need to ensure that the diversity of voices is represented in these conversations about AI, and then potentially making a connection about diversity and transparency, and perhaps some other tools that might be at our disposal to improve diversity and representation. And then the second question that is related is about stakeholders, about making sure that the people who should be at the table in these conversations, in fact, are well informed about these AI tools and are helped to and enabled in their participation in these regulatory conversations. So Cristina, perhaps to you first, and then I'd love to hear from Natalia as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Julian. Thank you, Tabitha, for that question. I think you put it perfectly. That is precisely the difficulty with the understanding of what responsible AI is. So it is easy to talk about the principles and to talk about be diverse, but okay, how do you eat that, how you touch that, right? So what we have been doing, Tabitha, is creating practical tools to help not only not only the policy makers, but the developers to start raising a little bit of red flags. So the first one is a self-assessment. Start asking the right question, the difficult questions, and start being like getting the ones that are thinking about the systems, asking the hard questions about the data, uh, to be for them to be intentional with the data. Which groups are left behind? What are you doing with the privacy of the data? Are you asking the right questions? Are you using this technology for solving a problem or only for the sake of using the technology? Do you have the clean data to do this, or are you using whatever data sets you have at your disposable, right? So it's asking, so the tool of the self-assessment is really important, and we are doing a data profile. We have a data profile tool as well for that, because the majority of the problem is data. If you are not represented in the data, you are not represented at all. And then the algorithm audit, I really like what Natalia said, is only one part of being the ethical or developing ethical AI. But I think it's really important. It's when it is like now when you have like shady books on your account saying, no, 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 what is happening? That is the same with the algorithm audits, or how I see it. And if we start making companies and governments accountable to explain what is behind those decisions, that would help us being more diverse and start opening this discussion. So completely agree with you. It's not easy. We are developing some tools that I can put at your, um, uh, I can put it in the chat or send it to Julia so Julia can share to all of us. Our our tools are in Spanish mostly because they are like adaptation and co-creation with the Latin American governments and some in Portuguese. Uh, but definitely, it's a great point. So I would love to hear what Natalia has to say as well.
Oh, thank you, and I absolutely agree with everything that you've just said, Christina. So I think I can maybe speak a little bit more to the second question, which is on how do we actually ensure that that people understand those decisions. And I think this is a huge challenge. This is the biggest challenge really when it comes to algorithmic transparency and the success of any algorithmic transparency measures. And when we began this work in the UK, this is essentially what we started with. So we ran a public engagement exercise with the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation, and with a research consultancy, Britain Things. And during that exercise, we actually reached out to people from all over the UK, and we had a sample of people who don't necessarily have much knowledge when it comes to digital government or technology in general. We had people with really low levels of trust in government because we purposely chose the sample of people who would be either not very interested or very skeptical towards those efforts. And we've actually asked, what can we do to make you care, and how we can present this information for you to engage with it, for you to find this interesting. And we had this really fascinating exercise. And I think here I'd maybe like to say that anyone doing those kind of measures within the government or even private sector, I would highly recommend to run to deploy deliberative methods, because that's the best way to truly understand what we can do and how we can make this work for the members of the public. So we had a huge sort of 3-week process of deliberation that actually concluded in those people that participated in the study designing their own algorithmic transparency measures. So after that, we collated all the findings. The agency that we contracted to do that wrote a really fantastic report that's available online, and I can share it afterwards as well. But some of those recommendations that were meant to facilitate understanding, we actually implemented, such as splitting the algorithmic transparency standards into 2 tiers. So tier 1, very simple, plain English description. Tier 2, more details, so that you don't have to read a long page if you just if you're only vaguely interested in what's going on. And I think so the first thing really I would say, go to those stakeholders and actually ask what they need. The second thing, and this is really basic, but I think we are forgetting this often, especially if we're working in policy, is use simple language, plain language. Write it in a way that's accessible to anyone. Think about, the target audience of people who don't necessarily know anything about technology. So there is that, and also go beyond websites and think about creative ways of informing people about the use of various algorithmic tools and AI. So for example, if that's used within the local area, why not put it on the local notice board? Or think about people who don't necessarily have devices, who don't have digital skills, who are excluded but still affected by AI. So these are some of the things that I would offer. And I'll stop now because I think we're out of time.
Great,
Thank
thanks.
you very much, Natalia. Yes, Stefan, over to you.
Yeah, no, me and Julia, you're doing a great job here. But no, I think this is great. And actually it answers one of the questions also with regard to how do we create capacity to actually be engaged, right? And create that kind of awareness. And I think, Natalia, you have already given some examples on how we can actually have a broader conversation and increase awareness about AI. But indeed, we need to go, unfortunately, into the closing of this session. And part of the purpose of having those panels is to also have a teaser for everyone to then go to the AI ethics course and actually explore the different modules that you've heard. So I give all of you a 1 minute closing opportunity. What's the leave behind that you want to share, so that people will, anyway, after this will go, I want to hear more from Avinash or more from Cristina and more from Natalia by just going to the AI ethics course as well. Over to you, Avinash. Why don't you start us with a 1 minute closing? Anything you want to leave behind as an idea or as an observation or a solution that you feel the audience here can benefit from? No pressure.
Okay, thank you. I will complete in 1 minute. So what I'm trying to say that I will talk only from the Indian perspective. So considering the policy regulation in last 10 years, what is my prediction, what is my observation, that very soon you will see in India very over-regulatory environment in the AI. Right now there is under-regulation, but very quickly, because India changes very quickly and we have strong technological base and support from the private as well as the government sector. So very soon we will see over-regulation of AI, which is currently happening in data privacy law. So I think a lot of developed countries, or we can say the north part of the world, maybe they will have a lot of issues with the Indian over regulatory environment, because most of IT companies are operating in India, huge database exists in India. So I think that will be an interesting time to see that how this global north and India, I'm talking only about India, they will interact with each other when once India start regulating AI emerging technologies from Indian side, because Indian side is very, very complex sometimes. So I think that would be the interesting to see. Thank you.
Cristina, over to you.
Thank you. So I think that my final remark would be that there is a relative widespread knowledge of the ethical principles that should guide the implementation of AI, but there is less clarity on how to apply them in practice. So part of our goal and for LAC and for the region has been creating practical tools to move the principles to practice for the region, but while ensuring not to bring the inequalities of the analog world to the digital one. That would for me would be the important part of moving from principles to practice.
Natalia, you have the last word.
Thank you. No pressure at all. So I think, as I said earlier, algorithmic transparency is the tip of the iceberg. And although some governments are making good progress on releasing those transparency returns, the truth is that the majority of people in the world don't necessarily know that those things exist and don't necessarily care. So I think, as cruel as it sounds for us, the AI ethics community, I think there is a huge piece of work to do for all of us, which is around raising awareness that AI is being used in the public sector, upskilling the communities on being able to actually find this maybe not necessarily find this information, because that's on governments, but actually challenge this information and understand it. So I think there is a lot of work that we all need to do in terms of upskilling, educating, raising awareness, and holding governments accountable. So that would be my last word. Thank you.
Very wise words, Natalia, to end this. And so thanks everyone for joining. Thanks, Natalia, Cristina, Avinash, for a wonderful set of remarks, and more importantly, wonderful modules that are available on our course. And thanks, Julia, as always, for joining me on this adventure. And more importantly, also thanks to Sampriti, who is always in the background, making sure that everything happens as well, and quite often never gets recognized by me. So thanks, Sampriti, and thanks everyone. Have a wonderful remainder of the day, and hope you can join us for future panels as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all. Bye.